I previously published a video compiling the many stupid actions taken by Gi-Hun, the hero of Squid Game Season 2. However, after re-watching how this seemingly clueless man managed to overcome every challenge and emerge as the sole survivor in Season 1, walking away with a massive 45.6 billion won, I realized there's far more to this character than meets the eye. Far from being a lucky fool, he is actually a subtle genius who outwits opponents by appearing far less competent than he truly is. So in this video, I'll revisit every stupid action I highlighted previously and explain my new perspective. Spoilers ahead. If you haven't watched Squid Game, Season 1 follows hundreds of desperate contestants who unknowingly enter a deadly competition based on children's games, all for a life-changing cash prize. Gi-Hun becomes the only survivor. In Season 2, he tries to shut down the organization just as a new group of contestants is recruited. With that in mind, I'll replay sections of my previous video while adding this new perspective. Gi-Hun's wrong perception was a key factor that doomed the players he tried to help in Squid Game Season 2. But how was Gi-Hun wrong? He was focused on the Squid Game's evil manipulation of desperate people. However, he failed to notice the twisted human psychology of those desperate people. Does that mean the victims are just as guilty as the oppressor? Not really, but if you think helping desperate people is as simple as offering help, and they immediately take it, you've got a surprise coming. This is clearly depicted in a seemingly meaningless, out-of-the-way crazy scene, which hints at the immensely valuable insight on why people stay in the horrendous Squid Game. In the scene, Choi and Woon Seok, two of Gi-Hun's search team members, follow the salesman. He buys a whole bunch of bread and 100 lottery tickets, all for the purpose of torturing homeless people in Tap Gold Park. He offered either a lottery ticket or a piece of bread to each beggar, and, unfortunately, many chose the lottery tickets with 0 winnings. Eventually, the salesman threw down and stomped on all the rejected bread right in front of all the beggars. That scene shows how quite a number of people choose to gamble instead of taking the little bit of help offered. Failure to appreciate this fact is how Gi-Hun ended up trying to save people who resisted his help. My new perspective is that Gi-Hun, whether consciously or not, understood the rejection he would face when trying to persuade players to leave the games. After all, he himself had been trapped in a gambling addiction. So the reluctance of other contestants wasn't shocking to him. This is clear from the fact that he kept trying multiple times to convince them to quit. If he didn't understand this aspect of human nature, risking everything for one more chance, he would have given up at the very first sign of resistance. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. It gets so much worse. We even have to question Gi-Hun's mental state. It certainly seems that Gi-Hun's perception of the world had been twisted by his experience in Squid Game Season 1. This is evident in the fact that he put his own life at risk instead of taking out the salesman in Squid Game Season 2. It seems that despite being free, he's mentally trapped in the Squid Game. And if he's trapped in the Squid Game, how can he free others from it? Wouldn't he keep them trapped in the game despite appearing to try to help them? One scene shows clearly that he's mentally trapped. The scene where the salesman breaks into Gi-Hun's motel. At this point, the salesman proposes to play Russian roulette with Gi-Hun. You have to wonder just how demented this guy is that he would risk his own life to prove a point. Even then, when Gi-Hun has the weapon in his own hands, he chooses to play the game and sticks to the rules even when the odds of survival get extremely low. This hints at the fact that Gi-Hun is still stuck in following the rules of these made-up games. Yet the organizers of such games create exceptions for themselves, as was evident in Squid Game Season 1, where Oh Il-nam, the creator of the games, was not terminated even when he lost. That makes you wonder whether Gi-Hun is being unknowingly controlled by the Squid Game operators. And it makes you question whether the help he offered other contestants was subconsciously part of the Squid Game master plan to keep everyone locked in. That's particularly concerning since Gi-Hun's intervention ended in disaster. Looking back at this moment, I realized that Gi-Hun wanted the Squid Game operators to think he was still under their control. Why risk his life just to give that impression? Most likely because he realized the salesman was sent to evaluate him and report back to the frontman. Gi-Hun understood he was cornered. His only option, if he wished to continue pursuing the frontman, was to play along, even if it meant stepping back into danger. But there's a deeper reason for this strategy, which I'll explain later in this video. Even so, if Gi-Hun's wrong perceptions were the only issue, the Squid Game players that he tried helping would probably have survived. However, he made a bunch of serious mistakes, which you probably didn't notice, that doomed the entire operation. Unfortunately, Gi-Hun made a bunch of bizarre mistakes which doomed the Squid Game players that he tried helping. The first mistake comes up when Woon-sok brings Gi-Hun food in the Pink Motel, after his daily task of searching for the Squid Game salesman on Subway's train stations on line 1 to 4 for the past 2 years. Seems like a thorough search, but here's the point at which you start to notice some cracks in Gi-Hun's plans. Due to the failure so far in finding the salesman, Gi-Hun instructs Woo-sok to start searching all the train stations at the same time, throughout the day. Of course, he has the money to pay for that, which makes you wonder why he waited 2 whole years to start this thorough search. If he had started this thorough search earlier, would he have found the salesman faster and tried to stop the games before the current group of Squid Game recruits? Here, Gi-Hun likely tried to stay unnoticed while searching for the salesman. The fact that he only invested serious money into the search 2 years later suggests that he intentionally kept a low profile. Possibly, he wanted to build up enough ammunition and prepare himself during that time. And that's not the only glaring mistake. Woon-seok is nothing more than the loan shark to whom Seong Gi-Hun owed money in the past. He's not the owner of a specialized private investigation agency, and his search team consists of a ragtag group of ordinary men. Yet they were looking for the recruiter for a dangerous underground game operation. Whether intentional or not, hiring a loan shark instead of a professional private investigator probably helped him keep a low profile even further. If the Squid Game operators were aware of his mission, they might disregard it as being less of a threat than it actually is. However, all those mistakes would not matter at all if only Gi-Hun didn't make one final mistake that sealed the fate of the players he tried to save in the Squid Games. The biggest mistake of all was Gi-Hun choosing to get back in the game. Although getting back in the game was secretly a ploy for Gi-Hun's team to track his location and find the Squid Game island, it also seems like taking an unnecessarily big risk, putting their biggest asset in a dangerous position. After all, they had already tracked the salesman recruiting other potential players. Couldn't they have tried enlisting some of them in this operation? At the very least, Gi-Hun would be an easy target since he was already known by the underground operation. And the Squid Game operators would definitely be extremely suspicious of his true motives, considering that he had already walked away with generation-altering wealth. A new player would hardly arouse any suspicion. But then, hindsight is 20/20. Gi-Hun's team probably realized this after their whole plan was foiled. This moment looked like a disastrous mistake, but it was actually part of a calculated risk. Gi-Hun likely knew the last thing the game operators wanted was for the contestants to hear that a previous winner was eliminated unnecessarily. That kind of news would destroy player motivation and collapse the entire system. We see this understanding when Gi-Hun taunts the frontman, asking if he's afraid of being beaten by a mere player. He knows that the frontman must play fair to keep the business running. However, those mistakes were only the trigger for an already predetermined disaster. The Squid Games themselves were already designed to make it impossible to save any of the contestants. And any effort to save them only hastened their path to destruction. This is Brill Comics. This channel is supported by your generous donations. When Gi-Hun infiltrated the Squid Game, he assumed he would be received warmly by manipulated victims who would only be too happy to be rescued from harm. However, he didn't account for the fact that the Squid Game had turned its victims into cold-blooded, money-hungry vampires. The shocking fact is that whether deliberately or not, Squid Game was designed to turn its victims into oppressors. It certainly seems strange that someone who suffered as a victim in the horrendous games would end up being the perpetrator. But how else would you explain the frontman being Jong-ho's long-lost brother, In-ho? In the first season of Squid Game, Jong-ho found out that In-ho was a past winner of the Squid Game. As strange as that may seem, that is probably the ultimate goal of the sickening games. You first get that impression in the scene where Woon-seok and Choi, two of Gi-Hun's search team members, are kidnapped by the salesman. At this point, it's already established how sadistic the salesman is, to the extent of torturing poor people literally as a hobby during his free time. What he has in store for the pair that tracked him down and attacked him is nothing less than gruesome. The salesman forces the two captives to play the game rock, paper, scissors, -1, with the loser having to play Russian roulette. Woon-seok deliberately chooses to lose the last round of the game to save Choi's life. So, how does that reveal the reason why Squid Games turn victims into oppressors? Well, it's clearly evident that the nature of the rock, paper, scissors, -1 game is for one contestant to indirectly get the other contestant terminated. The only way to get out of such a game with your morals intact is to do exactly what Woon-seok did, lose on purpose. Hence, the real options are to lose your life, or live with the fact that you literally caused the termination of another human being. So, it may seem that the process of the Squid Games gradually desensitizes competitors to the process of terminating their fellow man, literally turning them into villains. Once you see that, you can't help but notice how the Squid Games progressively become more and more treacherous. If you look closely at his actions, you'll notice that Gi-Hun actually adjusts his approach from game to game. He constantly tweaks the way he interacts with other contestants, showing that he's always considering how his actions might influence their behavior. Once you see that, you can't help but notice how the Squid Games progressively become more and more treacherous. Here's the shocking progression in Squid Game Season 2. The first game in Season 2 starts off looking simple, but that simplicity hides a malicious psychological, mental, and physical programming. Winning the first game, red light, green light, depends on your personal survival instincts. Sounds simple enough, since you did no harm to anyone, right? But then, remember that people are literally falling like flies around you, and your personal survival literally depends on damping your instincts to try to help save anyone. So, the first game has already instilled selfishness. No wonder quite a number of those who survived seemed to only think of the money they would get, right after going through probably the most shocking thing they had ever experienced in their lives. Gi-Hun's attempts to reason with them made them even more adamant, since they were mentally programmed to think that anything else beside their selfish goal is counterproductive. But there's something more pernicious. It also means that there was a likelihood that some or all the players who chose to stay in the first vote were probably already villains or turning into villains. Anyone who voted to stay was intending for others to be eliminated, regardless of any other excuse that they would give. Unfortunately, after the vote, when player 001 had chosen to stay, Gi-Hun didn't seem skeptical about the true intention of that player. At this point, there wasn't much else Gi-Hun could do. He tried his best to convince the players, but the situation simply didn't go the way he had hoped. Surprisingly, the second game brought back in the aspect of helping others. But it's not for any righteous reasons you may think. Winning the second game, Pentathlon, consisting of 5 minigames with 5-player teams, requires personal and group survival instincts. Sounds like it's not about selfishness anymore, since you're helping your fellow team members, right? But then, at this point, you already know that the game is only worth it if other groups are terminated to increase the prize money. So you're being trained on leveraging the power of a group to accomplish your selfish goals. And true enough, during the vote after that game, the contestant with the biggest debt aggressively rallied many people to pick the stay option. Clearly, player 100, Im Jong-dae, had the most selfish ambition, considering that others with far less debt could have easily solved their problems with the money accumulated at that point. And the groupthink dynamics was evident to see as the opposing groups chanted their unifying slogans. At this point, Gi-Hun shouldn't have been trying to convince individual contestants, since he now had to try to convince the entire group. The fact that he was appealing to the needs of individuals meant that he wasn't satisfying the needs of the whole group, making the stay group more reluctant to change their mind. In the second vote, Gi-Hun steps back and lets other members of his group make the argument. This shows he's leveraging groupthink since, at that point, the players were more likely to be persuaded by their peers than by a single voice. Moreover, things would quickly get out of control. The third game was the tripwire that would finally convert the assassins in training to real life. Winning the third game, Mingle, where you have to quickly form a group and get into a safe room, requires both personal and group survival instincts while you indirectly eliminate other groups. At this stage, all pretense of innocence is gone, since you know that there are limited safe rooms, so your success literally means the elimination of others. It's an insidious ploy to get you to overcome that psychological huddle of causing harm to others for your selfish goals. So, it's no surprise that the fatal bathroom fight happened right after the third game. Before the bathroom fight, the only fight between contestants remained a fight between individuals. Now, things were different. A conflict between the same individuals turned into a group fight between the leave and stay camps. And since the psychological barrier for preserving life had been breached in the just-ended game, the resulting loss of life was inevitable. And it gets so much worse. Once the contestants made the connection between those lives lost in the non-game bathroom fight and the increased prize money, it was game over for Gi-Hun's plans to save them. The assassins were primed for real-life activation, which turned into a night of terror. Note that the Squid Game operators called it the Special Games, meaning that they had it all planned out. The games were designed to achieve that exact purpose. Here, Gi-Hun suddenly shifts from trying to save all contestants to focusing only on the small circle of people he cares about. Considering how consistently he tried to save everyone earlier, this shift suggests he realized there were no innocent players left. Eventually, the combination of all those factors meant that Gi-Hun's help would directly lead to the total damnation of the Squid Game players. But it happens in quite an unexpected way. Almost the opposite of what you would think. This is Brill Comics. This channel is supported by your generous donations. We can't categorically state that the contestants in Squid Game Season 2 would have been better off without Gi-Hun's help. However, the differences between what happened in Squid Game Season 1 and Season 2 leave a lot of unanswered questions, and Gi-Hun's role is a key factor in the equation. To begin with, did the fewer lost players in the first game of Season 2 lead to the stay vote winning? This issue arises in the scene where Gi-Hun guides many players to successfully complete the red light, green light game based on his past experience. Unlike in the first season of Squid Game, whereby more than half the players lost their lives, less than a quarter were terminated in the first game of the second season. Apparently, the shock in the second season was dampened by the low player loss, unlike the first season that shocked everyone to the point that majority voted to leave. They didn't have any money at all to leave with after the first game in the first season, unlike the second season, yet they chose to stay in the second season. By voting to stay, players in the second season were putting themselves in more harm to the point where they might all be eliminated. This is a difficult moral dilemma, similar to the classic trolley problem. Should Gi-Hun stay silent and let the shock of the resulting mass casualties push the few remaining survivors to quit? Or should he warn them, making the losses smaller but giving the many surviving players confidence to continue? What do you think he should have done? But that's not the only thing that negatively affected players due to Gi-Hun's help. Probably, after realizing Gi-Hun's influence in the first game, the rest of the games were changed by the Squid Games organizers. Here, the second game changed from a single-player game of cutting out shapes on a fragile cookie to a set of 5 mini-games for teams of 5 players. Not only did they have to play more games in one challenge, but they also had to rely on other players who may be far less skilled. Evidently, things seem to have taken a turn for the worse. Whether Gi-Hun expected the games to change or not, this situation actually helped him convince some players to vote to leave. Several contestants were relying on his knowledge of the Season 1 games, giving them the confidence to vote to stay. Learning that the games could be altered shook that confidence, making them vote to leave. In the same way, it's also possible that Gi-Hun's presence forced the Squid Game organizers to rig the games even further. They did this by the frontman, In-ho, joining in for the vote after the first game, which broke the tie between the leave versus stay votes. Unfortunately, Gi-Hun was not skeptical of player 001, despite knowing that the previous player 001 in Season 1 was an insider. The previous player 001 was the literal creator of the Squid Game, Oh Il-nam. Besides, the current player 001 seemed strangely skilled in fighting. But that still didn't ignite Gi-Hun's suspicions. At this point, there was nothing Gi-Hun could realistically do. However, intentionally or not, his inaction might have made him appear far less threatening to the game operators, to the point where he could launch a coup attempt from right under their noses. Just to be fair to Gi-Hun, there were several unbelievable failures by his allies that would have doomed his operation, even if he was flawless. Gi-Hun's allies made some unbelievable mistakes that made them seem like traitors. One mistake was particularly crucial in leading to the ultimate breakdown of Gi-Hun's bravest attempt at overthrowing the Squid Game. In fact, this was actually a deliberate lie by Jun-ho telling Gi-Hun that he hadn't seen the face of the frontman. Admittedly, this was before Gi-Hun and Jun-ho trusted each other, and Gi-Hun had handcuffed Jun-ho. But then, Jun-ho never revealed the truth afterwards. By not realizing that the frontman was In-ho, Jun-ho's brother, Gi-Hun, literally had no idea that player 001 was the frontman. This led to complete failure of the attempted overthrow of the Squid Game operation. Player 001 double-crossed Gi-Hun at the very last moment that they had blockaded the frontman's office. Gi-Hun was clearly cautious about trusting Jun-ho, but considering the danger he faced in his mission, he didn't have many options for choosing reliable allies. If that isn't enough to make you angry at Jun-ho, there's a lot more to his failures that make him look like an unintentional villain. Being a police officer, it seems Jun-ho already had two leads with which he could start with in searching for the organizers of the Squid Game, without Gi-Hun risking his life to infiltrate the games. Jun-ho knew In-ho was the frontman, and he knew at least one of the rich men who paid to be entertained by the Squid Game. The rich man, in particular, would likely have a whole bunch of massive businesses that could be located, making it possible to track him. Why didn't Jun-ho do that? Instead, he spent 2 years searching the open sea with Captain Park, who had rescued him following his encounter with the frontman. Right there is another error that ruined everything. The bond Jun-ho had with Captain Park would end up being an unintentional mistake that ruined the search operation to rescue Gi-Hun from the Squid Game Island. It's possible that Captain Park leaked this critical intel to the frontman, since it turned out that he was on the villain's side. The captain literally eliminated one of the rescue team members under the cover of darkness, after being caught sabotaging the drones. Given his Season 1 experience, Gi-Hun was very aware of the betrayal and treachery he could face from his group. The fact that he kept pushing forward, even after his plan was compromised by spies among his companions, shows how determined he was to end the Squid Games for good. Seeing that we're apportioning blame on everyone, we might as well put some blame on the single group of people that Gi-Hun tried to save too. It may seem like victim blaming, but ultimately, the players bear responsibility for cooperating with their rescuer. Perhaps we can excuse them during the first vote when they chose to stay, since anyone going through what they had would still be experiencing massive trauma and lack any rational thinking. But then, after the vote, there was a clear separation between those who wanted to leave and those who wanted to stay. Unfortunately, those who wanted to leave were seriously naive as to the kind of threat the other group posed. Those who intended to stay literally wanted the rest to be eliminated in order for them to get more money. The stay group had literally become villains. So it was a complete and utter disaster that the two groups went to the bathroom together. And that's where the first fight broke out that led to the elimination of several players. Once the stay group noted that the prize money increased following those terminations, they revealed their true nature by initiating a riot that ended the lives of many of the leave group. At that point, the ongoing chaos was way beyond Gi-Hun's capacity, and there was nothing more he could do to stop it. Even if it wasn't his initial plan, Gi-Hun eventually took advantage of the fact that the players had become desensitized to terminating others. This made it easier to recruit some of them in the final confrontation against the game operators. If he had attempted this coup earlier, almost no one would have followed him. This is Brill Comics. This channel is supported by your generous donations.